Hello and welcome to Taking Liberties, episode 37. Today we have a special episode where we're going to go from Shanghai to Sacramento, and we're going to be talking about Chinese donations and net neutrality. So, with that in mind, say hello to our two other guests today, which is Zeev over in Victoria. Seems to be having a lot of, as far as I can tell, plates falling somewhere. And we also have our good friend. Fuck.
Okay, let's see how long
I think it's
go.
Lee.
I know it's Lee. I'm just like, holy crap! How could I forget that? I was just like, damn it, and now I've forgotten. But no, sorry. And Lee from West Australia is obviously here. It's a regular host.
Yep.
And of course, there's me from the ACT. So. I guess we'll open up with the obvious one, which is Shanghai Sam, which everybody's been talking about for the last couple of, I want to say, days since it came out. Yeah.
Thing because there was a little bit going on, a couple of weeks ago, and then it kind of died down, and then it sort of flared back up. And basically, do you want to explain the background?
Yeah, I was going to say, well, he kind of resigned. So, like, the initial thing was he was receiving donations from Chinese nationals. Which is a kind of a no-no, and he kind of stepped aside from his shadow ministry position, and basically because he stepped down and become a backbencher again. I guess no further investigation was going into it. Now it turns out that someone had a video of him talking with a certain Chinese donor that may or may not have had their phone tapped by security organizations in Australia.
And
now,
so know that they're being tapped.
Yeah, and he let them know that they're being tapped. Now, if this is true, if it were anyone else, it would be a case of leaking national secrets, blah, 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 blah. But in this case, it's because it's a politician that there is definitely a one rule for them, one rule for everyone else, in the sense that they own that information technically. And therefore are free to declassify on the spot if they need to.
Well, that's not the case. I mean, Sam doesn't have any authority to declassify anything on the spot. I think the only person who would have anything approaching that kind of authority would be the Attorney General. And Sam, the thing to bear in mind about Sam is his warning that to this gentleman that their phones might be tapped. First of all, he doesn't even necessarily know whether that's the case, whether their phones are being tapped. It could just be an offhand remark. So that needs to be distinguished from classified information. I would make that point. The second point I would make is even if it is, it's just common sense that the man is under some severe scrutiny and has been under some severe scrutiny, and he should know it, they should know it. And this media furor based on the idea that he's disclosing something classified, maybe not. Maybe the real reason, I think the more likely reason people are upset, of course, is that it's suggesting that he's in some way inhibiting surveillance efforts for the sake of this man, or willing to inhibit them, at least in theory. Even though in this case it's obvious that no harm was really done, because this man would have to have rocks in his head to not realise that he was under surveillance by the point that he was being warned by Sam Dastyari weeks after being in the news about this issue. Yeah.
No. So this event occurred in 2016, long ago. But I actually think you might be wrong about the only person allowed to declassify is the Attorney General. I was under the impression that all of them can because parliamentary privilege, and that's in Parliament itself. But on top of that, there's also...
I suppose, yes, but that's in Parliament. That's a different thing.
And the other thing is also there have been numerous instances where members of the shadow ministry have revealed things in public discussion, particularly to the media, which were revealed in closed doors in security briefings. And that's happened between the opposition and the governments of the day. So I would question exactly how much that is the case, because if it is, there's tons of violations you can point at.
Well, again, and the thing is that whether those violations are legal violations and whether they're enforced legal violations of confidentiality and whether they're being enforced properly are different things from the shadow ministry just kind of disclosing them. Like, they may be illegal. It may be an enforcement issue that they're not being taken to task over, but the fact is the shadow ministry doesn't have that authority. Parliamentary privilege, definitely.
Yeah.
If you get a confidential report, you can probably rely on parliamentary privilege to say what you will about it, and you might be expelled from the chamber very shortly afterwards, but you can. And anyway.
Not that it's relevant in this case because it was apparently at a party fundraiser.
Yeah.
I mean, I think some other aspects to this, which is, I mean, so he received money previously. You know, he got kicked off the front bench because his support for China's position on the South China Sea, which was sort of conflicting with ALP policy. I mean, I think some of this
was seen to be kind of a favour in kind for all the hundreds of thousands of dollars of donations that they were getting from this Chinese businessman. I mean, with mysterious links to the Chinese Communist Party.
Well, I mean, I'm pretty sure you can assume all high-profile businessmen from China are linked to the Chinese Communist Party. I mean, it's the nature of
it's the only way you can
do
business
without. Exactly. Yeah.
I mean, I think so. I suspect that Sam's opinion wasn't bought off by China. That is, I think he probably pre-existingly thought that China, China can ignore the international community and the South China Sea and international rulings and that sort of stuff. And then the Chinese government found that he had this position and then started supporting him. I don't know if that's inherently like a terrible thing. I mean, all of his opinions are on the record. Like, it's like, I mean, I guess some of it's hidden.
It's not some mystery what he believes.
Exactly,
yes.
Yeah. No, like, so, I mean...
And if we look at the merits of the position, I mean, from at least from a libertarian perspective, non-involvement in a territorial dispute between China and other nations neighbouring it, I mean, you could say that's a defensible thing, right? I mean, Australia shouldn't perhaps get involved.
I mean, I guess that's a little bit complicated because there's... Generally, border disputes, there's sort of an international process for dealing with that. And so to what extent should any individual country reject that process when everybody's kind of agreed that's how they're going to do it? I mean, I don't know if you can strictly... I'm not an anti-internationalist in that regard. Like, people who... Libertarians who cry about the WTO or things like that, I'm not entirely convinced that that's organizations like that are not a terrible idea.
No, and private courts between countries aren't a terrible idea either. But the funny thing about the South China Sea is, so China is our number one trading partner, right? If China were to control the South China Sea outright, as in like had full control over it, like all the economic interests going through it, it might be bad for Vietnam. But we don't do any real trade with Vietnam. Nor do we do any real trade with the Philippines, which is the other place that would be impacted negatively. Now, from a purely defensible position from Australia's perspective, China controlling the South China Sea is basically, hey, we now have complete and literal uninterrupted access to our major trading partner through space they control. Now, from a US perspective, I can understand the problem because this impacts their... what's the term? Force projection.
Yep.
So,
especially when it comes to Taiwan and that sort of thing.
Yeah,
pretty much
for Taiwan. Yeah.
Yeah. So America's big strength. America has two major strengths around the world right now. The first is logistical superiority. They have the ability to launch a war in any country on the planet within 48 hours. Like that's force projection capability that no one else on the planet has. The other thing that they have is the ability to do force projection without naval support present. Now, that becomes hard when someone does have naval support in the region that's quite strong, which is why you don't see the Americans trying to do a lot of stuff in the Baltic Sea. Conversely, you see them going through the Pacific like they freaking own the shit.
Yeah.
which they kind of do,
They
I
kind
guess.
of do. I mean, you think about the number of U.S. military bases that would be in the Philippines and Japan and South Korea. I mean, those, like, basically, that basically hems in China, more or less, at their coast. And, which, I mean, I guess there is a question, right, over to what extent is China willing to back up their kind of aggressiveness on this issue with military force, because obviously if they start shooting at people, that's of concern. I think at the moment it's just everybody's got their dicks out and are swinging around and showing how tough they are, and I don't think that's hugely concerning in and of itself.
I think that's the way it'll remain, because they're not, I mean, generally speaking, governments like these, I mean, they make big threats, but unless the opposition lies down, they're not really minded to go through hot wars. Particularly if you look at China at the moment, it's not. I mean, it's a growing economy.
It's also $17 trillion in debt right now.
Yeah, it is, of course, and that doesn't spell let's go to war. There's just I wouldn't say there's much on the radar for China going to war over a bunch of sea. It's just doesn't strike me as something that they're going to do.
Sure, I mean, I guess I don't think they will do it, but generally political concerns are not based on rationality. So there's an internal logic to any dictatorship that says, propping up support is the main thing and looking tough is important. And, going by media reports, it sounds like the current president of China is trying to exert a fair bit of power within the Communist Party. Maybe he decides picking a fight with the Philippines, or conversely, maybe Duterte in Philippines decides that he wants to show how tough he is and start shooting at,
strikes me as more likely, actually,
Chinese patrol boats or whatever. So like these things don't always make sense at a rational level. I agree. Until you consider like the domestic concerns, because in the end, all wars are domestic, done for domestic reasons.
But that sort of explains all the rationality behind China. But to come to the point of what would be the appeal to I guess you could say Sam Dastyari to go by this. Obviously, he holds these opinions already, and he's not really giving the Chinese anything by taking the money and sort of expressing an opinion he already holds. So the other thing is, I don't like the way the Labour Party has thrown him under the bus over this issue. I'm pretty sure. Look, Sam got in at the age of 30. He was their youngest senator ever, right? I don't think he rose to the top of that ticket without them knowing exactly what he was doing, right? I don't think he was elevated to a parliamentary
wasn't
shadow
he
parliament.
The former head of the party in New South Wales? Wasn't he
for the young division, for the youth division? Yes, he was. Yeah,
and he was a former secretary of the New South Wales Labor Party as a whole.
As well.
Yeah.
So he's progressed up the ranks, and he's done everything that you're meant to do inside the party. There is no way the party was unaware of this, and in fact, you've got a story that came out today.
The party was meeting this donor regularly, and so were the Liberals. Yeah. So this idea that he was going to great lengths to please them, well, so was everyone else. Everyone else was getting his money too.
Yeah, I think Clinton Mead from the LDP had the best allegory for this, and he said basically it's just like the drug war, right? The kingpins, everybody's making money, mostly the kingpins, right? But you throw out the mule. When the mule gets caught, you throw them out. And that's what's happened here. Dastyari hasn't done anything that anybody else hasn't done. The only thing is he got caught. As for this entire thing about, conversations where he might have told people they were phone tapped, etc., etc., etc. Look, Turnbull's done the good thing here and handed it to the security agencies, right? So he's nipped it in the bud. It's not going to be a political discussion for much longer. It's now going to be there's an investigation ongoing, and now they're not going to comment on that, at least until the investigation results come out. So that's a good thing. I think that's the right action. And if it is, if it does turn out that, hey, he somehow managed to get information from a national security thing and obstructed an investigation, then that's going to be a real problem for the Labour Party in the same way as other criminals that they've had, like Eddie Obeid and Craig Thompson.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, just to sort of go back to the Labour Party angle of this, I mean, I'm pretty sure Bob Carr is somewhat in this same camp as Sam Dastyari in terms of, China essentially should have more freedom to do what they want.
well, they're also in the same faction, so...
Yeah, well, yeah. So, I think in the Labour Party there's kind of maybe it's not anti-US, but certainly anti-US kind of hegemony type position where, somewhere like, this is kind of a flashpoint between sort of the US, world policeman kind of thing and the China's kind of
a more moderated kind of Australia should just butt out of things.
Yeah,
position.
exactly. Where, obviously in the Liberal Party there would be a hell yeah, America, go everywhere, do anything kind of sort of position. So I think it's probably worth recognising that he's not alone in that position. I mean, what do you guys reckon? Do you reckon that if Dastyari is found to have told somebody that their phone was tapped, that he thinks their phone was tapped, should he go?
Well,
I'm almost under the impression that it might be a joke.
Okay.
I don't think so, purely because if that's all he said, and especially if he didn't know whether or not it was the case, then it was just open speculation, then I'm not sure that amounts to something that someone should be dismissed for. But it's up to the voters, really, to decide whether that's too much. And I'm undecided. I'll put it there.
By the way...
Oh, so can I just pose another theoretical before we sort of finish up and move on? What if it turns out that he'd got, somebody had dropped the hint to him that, like it was at a party or whatever, he actually knew for real that from a proper source that they were being tapped? Because this is true of like politicians in a range of different areas. Like all sorts of politicians get information about their allies. If they reveal that information, should they face actual sanctions? Should they be kicked out of Parliament? That kind of.
I think he should be facing criminal sanctions if that was the case. At least obstruction of justice.
Okay.
I would think that would be the case. Yeah, I would agree with Vickers on that one.
Okay.
Yeah. So, but having said that, though, if in case people are wondering why we're being unusually nice about a Labour minister, Sam Dastyari he's one of the better Labour senators. Liberal senators is one of the better ones. For anyone who's not aware, he's frequently argued for deregulation of credit cards.
Okay.
So, I mean, he gets a tick from my book for that. And that's about it.
There was also the Western Sydney Wanderers thing where he sort of teamed up with David Lionhelm over the kind of their investigation by police. So, not the worst, I guess.
As against that, he wants Australia Post to become a bank, a government-owned bank.
Yeah.
He wants them to have a banking license.
That's true.
Well, that's probably not the worst idea either. Really?
Considering how much finance is handled through the post office, I would say... But the thing is, that might actually work to... That would actually probably work to Ozpost's benefit to do that.
I mean, I'm of the view that there should be more banks anyway, full stop. So that's my general position.
In some way, We
should move on.
But anyway... Yeah, so the second topic, I mentioned Sacramento, and that's because, look, a lot of you guys read American news, and I saw net neutrality pop up, and then all of a sudden I'm just like, wow, Australian libertarians are educating themselves about net neutrality. So for anyone who doesn't know what net neutrality is, it's basically internet communism. That's the way I describe it. It's communism for the internet. So what it
doesn't have to be, but it is as it is at the
usually
moment.
It usually is. And the funny thing is, it's based off it's a problem searching for a solution. Sorry, a solution searching for a problem. Yep. Wrong way around. Right? So net neutrality poses that ISPs could act in a way that is unfavorable to popular services on the internet, right? And thus make it harder for you as a consumer to get to it. Now, let's pretend that that's true. Why the fuck would you use them as an ISP at that stage? And the second thing is, if it's a popular service, why aren't they signing the deal? Sorry, why aren't they in a leading position with the ISP? Because the ISP has to provide content to its users, right? I mean, the internet is about accessing content. So effectively, the problem as described, it requires a lot of things to be 180 on their head, and also I guess you have to really, really buy into this idea that a large multinational corporation is somehow a better guy than another large multinational corporation. And you have to defend that guy by making your internet more expensive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's also worth pointing out the sort of the way it's played out. So, in terms of the actual policy, so essentially, the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission in the US, they tried a couple of different ways to try and regulate the internet, to bring in this net neutrality policy. It was struck down by the Supreme Court a couple of times, and then what they decided to do in the end is essentially to activate 1930s regulation of the telephone companies. They essentially classified all internet service providers as public utilities.
Yeah,
which gives them incredible breadth, like to get involved in every sort of thing, every little thing they do. So one of the first actions they took with this new power, this is back in 2015, was to essentially there was a mobile provider who would give like uncapped data from certain websites. So it was like YouTube and something else. And if you stream data from if you stream video from YouTube, it wouldn't count against your data cap. Now under net neutrality, because you're preferencing, you're treating some data differently from other, that's a breach of net neutrality. They investigated them, and they got them to get rid of this service. I mean, clearly, this is where.
So as a result, people are now paying more for their internet.
Exactly. Yeah. So,
yeah. And to give you a sense of perspective, by the way, there is no such thing as net neutrality in Australia. Telstra and other providers allow unmetered access to their websites and to their streaming providers.
Yeah.
And, the ground hasn't fallen over. No. It's a minor subsidy that Telstra is paying towards its providers, its own property. Yeah. And it strikes me as if a lot of the debate seems to overlook this basic fact that the call for net neutrality is a call for the providers to provide content so as to comply with what bureaucrats want, rather than what people actually want with that property.
Actually, that's not no. So if you ever look at if you ever look at all of the pro net neutrality arguments, what they always say is, it would be really, really bad if a company, say like Telstra in Australia, said, hey, look at all our content, right? You have to pay this much to access only that content. If you want to access outside of that, you have to pay this much, right? So they're saying, like, we don't want something like the what do you call it, the pay TV system, where it's just like your standard internet only covers Google, this website, that's our website, and then you got to pay for these other websites, and you got to pay for this other website, and then for unlimited access you got to pay for that, which will never happen because it's actually really hard to do, right? It requires significant infrastructure investment. It requires significant human overhead to actually implement all of that. No, I'm not saying that it can't be done. I'm saying it's very expensive to do so. So, which is why what you see actually happen without net neutrality is that the caching that companies typically do, because they cache these services, they're like, well, we're not really downloading anything from anywhere else, so we're happy to pass on the fact that this is unmetered back to you.
You may need to explain what caching means to people.
Oh, sorry. So obviously you don't want to. So ISPs can't afford to download from websites all the time because you pay for data. They pay for a lot of data. So for data that is requested quite often, they have things in place or agreements in place to keep a copy of that on their own servers.
Which basically means they don't have to download it as often, which means that users can download it from one central place, which is part of the debate here. The fact that access to these sites is, in America, subject to net neutrality means that there is less of that caching as it happens, as I understand.
No. Caching still. No. The caching still happens. So they're not.
Yeah, but less so.
Yeah, no. It still happens to a
No?
normal rate. Yeah, it's in fact it probably happens to a higher rate than here because infrastructure is significantly cheaper than there. All net neutrality does is the saving of that doesn't get passed on to the customer.
Yep.
Mm.
Which means
Interesting. Okay.
it's harder for companies to then offer special services that differentiate themselves from others. So in Australia, we have Optus. They offer unmetered streaming from, I think it's Spotify and Netflix, which I suspect is, for a lot of young people, that's essentially the two services they're going to use all the time. If they can't offer that, it's harder for them to distinguish themselves in the market from any other, mobile provider on the market.
Well, actually, every major ISP in Australia does Netflix for free now.
Oh, really? Okay,
It's
I
all
didn't realise that.
Yeah.
Fair enough. So I guess there's one element that we should bring up in terms of, because in the context of the US debate, and I think it's relevant here as well, is that quite often people will sort of point to, well, there's only, in a lot of cities, there's only one provider, one ISP. It's Verizon or AT&T or nobody. And nobody else.
Well, hang on, no.
That's not true.
No. That's not true. It's only one terrestrial provider, which means like one fiber to the home.
One cable provider.
Yeah, but it's not okay. But it's
also
not true that
4G providers, wireless providers.
Yeah.
So like I don't.
And the point to make about that is that in terms of cable providers, the fact that there's only one or two in a given area is usually because local governments make it very expensive for these providers to lay their cables across the city. It involves a lot of red tape that is costs a lot of money to get through, basically. And you might say
rental of the poles is basically the biggest cost.
Or actually, sometimes they offer actual monopolies. Like sometimes, one of these big cable providers will come in and say, "We'll put in this infrastructure, but you need to give us an exclusive monopoly for X period of time." So sometimes it actually is literally a monopoly because of the government. Because it's not. I mean, in the end, you're putting lines on poles or lines in the ground. It's not rocket science. Like it's not like it's an engineering challenge that nobody can figure out, and only a handful of companies have the magic secret that allows them to do it. It's you dig up the ground, you stick a cable in the ground, and you just do that enough so that everybody gets it. It's really not that hard, and it's probably not even that expensive because it's such a simple task. It's just it requires a lot of capital, but I mean realistically, there is the capital out there for these sorts of services. I mean, if there was more, and it's true in Australia as well. Like I mean, we have issues with the leftovers of the Telstra monopoly, but telecommunications are heavily regulated in Australia, and it's not. I mean, in some areas you're not going to get a lot of providers just because we're very sparsely populated. But if you live in urban Sydney, if you live in urban Melbourne, there really should be no issue for companies to start rolling out more infrastructure. It's only because the government makes it incredibly difficult that we don't have more of it.
Yeah, so I don't know how true this is in America, but in Australia, the two biggest headaches that companies have to deal with is firstly getting an agreement from the pole owners, right? Because there's particular regulations around what can be on a pole, safety distance and all of that stuff. So compliance. So getting the pole owners to actually allow you to put the cable on, or if you've got a tunnel, you've got to meet a whole bunch of compliance with relation to flooding and all sorts of other things, and like registering for the dial before you dig number and providing them with accurate information. It's a whole bunch of stuff they have to go through. And then on the other side, there's the actual rental cost of putting it on the poles as well. Or if you've got those stupid lines, if you've got those underground lines, which everyone's a fan of, you have to pay rates to the government. Yeah. To the local government, which is horrendous as well. And they work out all sorts of deals to get the price down, but it's still, reasonably expensive. It's enough to, unless there's significant money made in areas, it's enough to turn away from sparsely populated zones.
But the problem is, guys, you're just stooges for big corporate America, and you hate poor people. Why do you hate poor people so much? I mean, this is like literally the argument. Like, I mean, so I'm a big fan of Reddit. I use it a lot. The day that this change at the FCC to eliminate net neutrality, like people completely lost their minds. Like, I've seen some like crazy idiotic stuff on the internet. This was like unprecedented in its stupidity. Like literally every subreddit on the entire bloody website was like, we need to stop the end of net neutrality. And their argument is literally, we just hate poor people. So I
Yeah.
don't know. What do you guys think? Like, how would you counter that argument when?
Well, I mean, I guess
Poor people don't
the way
use the internet.
You mean
Wow.
they don't drive cars or whatever it was that Joe Hockey said?
Yeah, I would Joe Hockey the shit out of that argument.
Well, I would try to give some analogies as well. I mean, one analogy that Jeffrey Tucker talked about was imagine if furniture retailers managed to implement furniture import logistics neutrality. So all the furniture delivery companies had to deliver all the furniture at the same cost, doesn't matter how heavy it is, to their stores in the name of furniture neutrality. Now, obviously, really big furniture companies that delivered a lot of heavy furniture would benefit from that, but would consumers benefit? I mean, would the same thing follow? Another example that I thought of in my own head was, I mean, imagine if every single cafe in the country had to, for some reason, stock the same kind of coffee in the name of coffee neutrality, and people were saying, well, I mean, it's to save consumers from the evil cafes that would stock different kinds of coffee if they were legally allowed to do so. And I just thought, well, that kind of doesn't make sense. Surely the coffee company is benefiting from that. And in the same way, you can see that the people calling for net neutrality, the companies calling for net neutrality, are benefiting financially. Netflix, for example, is one. Anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, the two biggest companies that call for it are Google and I think Netflix now is also on the top of that list. So they stand to make millions in the savings from basically companies that are allegedly right now extorting them for extra money. Like basically, this gives them the opportunity to say, "Hey, we have this many million people, and you have to pay us this much for all of that data." And basically, you're right. Basically, the companies that are asking for it benefit quite enormously. And I mean, we end up losing quite a lot. And those examples are really good examples. And another good one I heard was mail service. Imagine if you were to send mail, and all of the mail you send was set to a standard size. You had to fit it into that standard size, and there was one fee. Right?
Right.
I don't think. I think most people would be like, "Oh shit! I would save, how much mail I need to send until, I absolutely filled it out."
I mean, I'd probably point out that we've had this very light-handed sort of regulatory approach for 20 years, 30 years probably, and
should we try the opposite?
Well, yeah, and what's happened is I think mobile phone penetration in Australia is like 98% of households have a mobile phone. So essentially, smartphones have conquered poverty. Like there's, if you look at the number of people in poverty and then compare, like a lot of those households have access to smartphones, and there's all sorts of stuff that's free to use on smartphones all the time. You can educate yourself, you can do banking, you do all sorts of things, and all of this is a product of not having to go to the government to get permission to do anything. It's essentially that you get to do what you like, and then maybe if there's some really bad outcome, the government might get involved. But the system that the net neutrality supporters want to go to is every time you want to do something, you have to get permission from the government. Well, you're going to have you need flexibility to have innovation, and the IT sector has grown through having incredible flexibility. And if you kill that off, then you kill off the goose that lays the golden eggs. But we should wrap up because we're out of time.
Yeah, I was going to say we're over time, so that's our episode for this week. I won't be here next week because I'll be in India. But yeah,
bad you.
Well,
letting down the
be
show.
Well, and
no, have fun.
Keep us updated on your travels there.
Whereabouts are you going?
A place called Bangalore.
I think
cool.
I've heard of that place. Nice.
Yes.
Anyway,
there.
I won't be here, but I'm sure Lee will take care of the episode next week. So, bye everyone.
Ciao.